Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Shaka Extra Time live on Facebook is Shaka Sali himself. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
I like your shirt.
Thank you so much. As a matter of fact, you can't believe how many compliments I've been receiving in this building today for this particular shirt.
You are one guy who can pull off interesting shirts like that. I love it.
I don't know about pulling off that kind of stuff, but look, this is authentic Ghanaian kente cloth, woven. This is not an imitation from China or anywhere. This is the real deal, the real thing, my man.
Well, let me welcome all our Facebook followers watching us from around the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to ask real questions and talk to Shaka himself. Once again, Shaka, we are back at it. Let's go straight away to Uganda. Things are heating up. The debate on lifting the age limit is ruffling a lot of feathers. Your take on it?
Why is it raging? I mean, let's face it, supporters of removing the age limit say that it is a discrimination. You'd be discriminating against people who are 75 and above. And in some way, they have a point. The only difference, frankly, is that they probably have to look at other situations also where that standard can also be applied. For example, we talk about being qualified for running for parliament in Uganda, or running for LC 5, or running for president, and you say that someone must have at least an education that is equivalent to higher school certificate. These are sort of 13 years of education in Uganda, is that correct?
Yes.
Or its equivalent. Can you imagine how many people in Uganda are disfranchised on that particular basis? And yet that seems not really be a big deal. Why should people be having a school certificate or HSC in order to represent their constituents? It should probably be an issue of character, of integrity, and of communication, really. Not a piece of paper speaking a foreign language.
But Shaka, maybe let me push back on that. The framers of the Ugandan Constitution looked at it and probably looked at some other areas, and they say that maybe perhaps at 75 somebody is ready to get to retire, and they're already tired. In Uganda's particular case, you have a very young population. Almost 75% of them are 35 and under. A lot of these young people look up to the current leaders. They say, you know what, when is our time coming? What's going on here? Why should the Parliament of Uganda, yes, they have that responsibility, they can amend the constitution. Why should they lift the term limits, maybe perhaps to benefit one person?
I have news for you, Paul. As an individual, Shaka Sali, a kid from Kavale, to be honest with you, ideally, I do not see any problem removing the age limit. My problem rather here is that this is a movement that is designed to benefit an individual or someone really. But if it were to be a matter of principle, I do not have any problem, because let's face it, we do not have that sort of age limit here, for example, in the United States of America. Nor do we have anything like that in the United Kingdom. And these are people who were our colonial masters, so to speak. There are some individuals, to be honest with you, who can perform remarkably beyond the age of 75. As a matter of fact, there are equally some people who can perform remarkably below the age of 35. In other words, you could actually have a president who is about 30 and can do a remarkable job. Most of these people, by the way, are post-independence leaders, really. Initially, they were very young people. Even when you read history very, very closely, and you look at some of these so-called discoverers, explorers, you look at people like, for example, Sir John Cecil Rhodes, a man who personally owned a country called Rhodesia, for example. He was a very, very young man, but he did remarkable things. So I don't think that this age thing, frankly, is neither here nor there. I think the problem here, frankly, is there is a personal and particular interest that benefits a particular individual. If, for example, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni were actually to come out and say, which is really what he wants, yes, I support the lifting of the age limit because it discriminates against those types of people. But I do not want to benefit from it personally for personal or political reasons. I would support him.
But what seems to be the problem? This is a constitution that was promulgated under his watch. This is a constitution that he had a hand in, right? Why is it now? Why didn't they make the changes when they sent out people to go and consult with people across the country who came up with these ideas? Why should it be now taking, why should they be consuming our time right now trying to change the constitution?
Paul, a constitution is a living document. In other words, it is not really carved out of stone. It can, in fact, be amended. The only problem here is the pettish parochial politics here, where the individual of Yoweri Museveni, who happens obviously, as you said, to be the brains, in fact, behind this particular constitution. He put it in place, but guess what? It did not even have a chance to withstand what they would call the test of time, because back in 2005, he actually amended it, removed the term limits so that he could personally and politically benefit so as to become what he appears to be now, a presidential monarch. And now he is obviously looking for, at least in terms of the people who oppose him, to become a monarch, establish a dynasty, so to speak, just like the Shah of Iran. The problem, frankly, here is that, let's face it, he must be probably very insecure. He probably, in the last 31 or so years, probably that position, you see, can give you opportunities to commit some crimes. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the tenure that Yoweri Museveni has been in the State House in Entebbe, you can imagine a lot of things have happened. And since then, there is the ICC elephant in the room. The Rome Statute came into being in 2002. So if you committed crimes against humanity or something after 2002, you are subject to be taken to The Hague. So probably he feels, frankly, very threatened, because there are people who say he may, in fact, have committed a lot of crimes as a result of being in that office. The question is, why does he, in fact, want simply to remain president so that he can probably continue enjoying the presidential immunity? But you know what? The ICC does not, in fact, recognize immunity.
Shaka, I wanted to go back to a point you made earlier, and you've previously talked about it. You said, in principle, you support this whole thing.
The open thing.
Yes.
Yes.
You want people to be able to run even after 75 years of age.
Fine, if in
right?
fact they are capable of doing so, yeah.
Yeah. But in this particular case, this whole thing, this whole debate, the reason it has generated a lot of interest, it seems to be revolving around one person.
Precisely.
Let's take an example of the retirement age in Uganda. It used to be 65, but lately it has been going down and down, right? You have so many able people who would otherwise be doing a lot of stuff, but they have been forced out to retire because the law requires that they retire. You've had some judges, you've had people who work for the government or who are in civil service forced to retire. Why is it about just the presidents? Why can't they lift the age limit for every single person who is interested, who still has the energy to work.
You have a point, Paul. There's no question about it, and there's no way, frankly, that I could possibly argue against that. Yes, it should not only be limited to the person owning, holding the office of the president. It should be an open thing so that it can also impact or affect those people who happen to be public servants, who happen to be judges. But then again, you can't probably put them in the same category, because being a president requires a lot, really, than simply being a judge or simply being a permanent secretary, for that matter, and all that kind of stuff. Because a president, my friend, when you're talking about a president, Uganda has probably a population estimated between 35 to 40 million human beings. It means the president of Uganda is actually carrying those millions of people on his back. So it's not a very simple job, my friend. But again, having said that, sincerely, I should reiterate that ideally I do not mind having an open situation where if a person is capable, has the ability, the capability of performing the role of that particular office, that person should be left to an election so that people can actually choose. But that is, again, if in fact you are in a country where they don't simply hold quote-unquote periodic elections, where they in fact hold elections that are seen to be free, fair, credible, and transparent. Not the type of elections that we have seen historically in Uganda since 1996.
Shaka, I know you are one of those fierce critics of President Yoweri Museveni.
No, I am not a fierce critic of President Yoweri Museveni. So, I am probably a critic of some of his policies, or what he does or he doesn't do.
Okay, can
not
you
the
look
person
in that,
of President Yoweri Museveni.
Okay, can you look in that camera and say that in principle you support the lifting of you support what the parliament is trying to do to lift the age limit for the president, but because of the way they are trying to do it to benefit one person, you don't support it?
No, but you see, why should I in fact look in the camera and talk to him about it? Because let's face it, he is old enough, he is much older than me, he is mature enough to know what I'm talking about. And frankly, in fairness to him, he is entitled to seeing things differently. He is entitled, for example, in fact, to want to be a king, if he so desires. It is up to the other Ugandans, really, the Anites of the world and what have you, who are trying to essentially change the political constitutional goalposts. Not so much that President Museveni actually remains president, because he's already president. He's a very rich man. He has so many things, frankly, going for him. It is because these Anites see him as a corporation. They see him as a corporation. So long as he stays in State House, they retain their position as ministers. So they continue to have, for example, free airtime on telephone paid for by the taxpayers' money, free petrol or gasoline, driver and everything. They just live like royalty. That's the reason, really, they are trying to have this president. Not that he is not interested either, because I have not heard him publicly say he is not interested. No. As a matter of fact, he's a very smart man. He's been talking about how that issue can only be resolved by the members of parliament. He supports the Constitution. The reason he says he supports the Constitution, because he knows clearly that the Constitution is a living document. It can be amended, and he can benefit from it. Why doesn't he, in fact, come up publicly if he's not interested in having that document being changed so that he can benefit from it? Because let's face it, that document has been mutilated. It is not the same type of document that you saw being promulgated back in 1995 when you were still in Uganda. This thing has actually ceased to be a constitution. It has almost become what some people call a personal or movement manifesto. It's not a constitution.
Yeah, Shaka, before we go to the comments, why are young people and some opposition leaders really finding it very hard to buy into this whole lifting of the age limit?
It is very simple, Paul, because let's face it, first of all, as far as they are concerned, this president has reached a point where he does not seem to be adding value. He is not, for example, growing the economy. He is not, for example, growing jobs. In Uganda, the last statistics I saw were like around 80% of the youth are unemployed. There are a lot of people now who go to universities.
But he has come up with initiatives like the wealth creation. Yes.
Come on, man. How many people have actually benefited out of that? Let's face it. You know, I think the fact of the matter is the majority of the people in Uganda now reflect the changing demographics. These changing demographics, they do not have jobs. They want to have jobs. They are not invested in the status quo. They are not invested in the economy. They are not benefiting from it. For them, frankly, the only thing they need or they want is change. Because guess what? The only thing they can actually lose are their chains. They do not have anything else to lose. They are not Anita, who will lose the free air type that I was talking about. They are not Anita and her colleagues who will be losing the free petrol or gasoline.
You could add Abiriga, the guy who is
Abiriga,
yeah, the guy who's at the center of this.
The guy who apparently did something untoward outside the Ministry of Finance.
I saw pictures of a whole honorable MP actually helping himself right on the side of the road,
and of
with
course,
a bodyguard paid for by the taxpayers' money standing right by him, watching over him.
And he was hiding behind what appeared to be a yellow Volkswagen.
Yeah. Interesting. So, Shaka, let's go to the comments.
And by the way, I'm sorry to say this, but looking at not only the young people, the religious people, of course, have said that this should be a matter for referendum. I don't even know why they think about the referendum, because let's face it, they know who conducts the referendum. They know who conducts the last elections. And they know that the results of the referendum or the elections do not necessarily become the reflections of the will of the people or the voters, but rather the will of the individual who announces the results, or the will of the people, in fact, who count the vote.
Actually, in fairness to that, I think this particular issue of lifting the age limiter is provided for by the Constitution and Honorary Parliament. They don't have to go to a referendum to have this kind of amendment in the Constitution.
Yeah, but you don't really have to hide under the Constitution. You don't have to hide under legalisms when the situation calls for a political solution. If people have been demonstrating all over the country, for example, people are making noise. There is a student, for example, who was killed at your alma mater, at Makerere University last week, I think I read. And they have been, in fact, arresting very important people, including the mayor of Kampala, the Lord Mayor, outside of his house.
And today people fought, the members of Parliament.
In the Parliament itself.
Yeah.
And then if you are talking about a president, frankly, who is supposed to be the, they call it the fountain of honor. If you are the fountain of honor, honestly, you have to step up to the plate and be in charge and make sure that you are a head of state, meaning you are, in fact, a leader of all the people in Uganda, not necessarily those who support you or those who are part of your political party or movement. Let's face it.
Yeah. So let's go very quickly to some comments here. Precious More from Uganda, she asks, what's your take on the proposed amendment to extend the presidential term age limit?
But I have already talked about that, really. I mean, let's face it. I told you that ideally I have no problem with that issue. But given the current circumstances, I honestly think no one should touch it. No one should touch it until some time in the future. Because after all, it used to be at one time, Paul, that when you looked at the Ugandans, they didn't seem to be living beyond 50 years of age or that kind of stuff. But now you have people who live much more for a very much longer time. But when you look at the public opinion polls, by the way, and I was looking at the Afro barometer, you will be surprised. The issue should not even be raised. not even within the president's own political party, which is the NRM. They actually are in the high 70s, 60s, rejecting it. But the opposition, we're talking about 90s. When you talk about women, low 70s, men, upper 70s. So, in fact, almost the country, for that matter, frankly, does not even want to discuss the issue.
Okay, another commenter from Uganda, Greens Kansime. What's your personal assessment of the politics currently in Uganda? Are we on the right path, or we are headed to something unknown territory?
Let's face it, not until we, first of all, agree on the modus operandi, on how we are going to be governing ourselves, and how we are going to be planning, and how we are going to be developing our country or society, can we even talk about whether we are on the right track? For example, in the last 15 years, we have had elections which are described, frankly, as periodic elections, but whose results, for example, leaves a lot to be desired, because there is empirical evidence, or incontrovertible evidence for that matter, not liable to falter, that the results of those elections, as a matter of fact, have not reflected the will of the people, have actually been reflecting the will of the individuals that announce the results. So we can't even ask a question like whether we are on the right track. No question about it. We are not on the right track. This is the situation, frankly, where, let's face it, the president appears to, like to appear like a Democrat and what have you. But in fact, when we talk about the political reality, his primary political base is made up of the military, of the security forces. That's why he occasionally dons military fatigues himself and a gun across his chest to intimidate people.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who have made comparisons to what happened today in Parliament, to what happened on Tuesday last week in Parliament, to the likes of what happened in 1966, what they called the Pigeonhole Constitution. Do you see any similarities?
Well, in a sense, you see, at the time, of course, Obote happened to be the executive prime minister, head of government, but not head of state. The head of state used to be also the king of Uganda, Sir Edward Mutesa II. Obote sent the military, which in fact he was not supposed to be in command of. But a man called Colonel Idi Amin Dada took his orders, went, attacked the palace of the Buganda king, who also happened to be the president of Uganda and the commander-in-chief of the Uganda Armed Forces. But frankly, he didn't have much power, very much ceremonial. And when he overthrew the Kabaka of Buganda, who happened to be prime minister, he decided to merge the positions of the president, who was head of state, and the position of prime minister, who was head of government, executive prime minister, and became the president, almost like an emperor. And then, of course, he had a Godfrey Binaisa, who happened to be his attorney general, who was a Muganda himself, but frankly, his credentials, from what I remember, and I knew him very, very intimately, was a very nationalist type of politician, and in fact, you could even say Pan-Africanist. But he was, in a sense, put under pressure, where he had to mutilate the Constitution, write it, change it, for the benefit of then Prime Minister Dr. Apollo Milton Obote. Then they put the copies of that mutilated Constitution into the pigeonholes or letter boxes of the members of Parliament. And it was also at a time, by the way, when the military came in the front, really, to dictate what type of politics you had. And eventually, the MPs were actually pressured, intimidated into signing something they probably didn't even read. And of course, then Uganda became a republic, so to speak, and you had a prime minister merging the positions, the two positions, the prime minister and the president, and becoming a presidential monarch. until, of course, he was overthrown by a man who had helped him to become that, who was then Major General Idi Amin Dada in 1971. So are you saying that there is perhaps a possibility of a military coup somewhere along the way?
I am not aware of that unless if you have more details about that, you could speak to that. But
how do you talk about a coup when you have a gentleman who has really been very, very, I think, very smart at managing the Uganda People's Defense Forces, which in fact he actually calls my army, and he also calls the budget and what have you my money, and he also calls the oil which still is in the soil my oil. He seems to be very comfortable in charge.
Yeah, we have time for maybe one more comment. There is an interesting thought here from one Twesige James. He wants to know, seeing as what Zimbabwe has gone through with the old man, President Robert Mugabe, what lessons can Ugandans learn from Mugabe's long time in office, and his efforts towards development of peace and stability in his country?
You know,
he seems to imply that Uganda is along the same path.
Yeah, but I think that
a symbols of stability.
Yeah, maybe there are some aspects where you could say there are some similarities, but let's face it, like him or dislike him, President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, a man, by the way, who has 7 degrees, talking about HSC. This man is a founding leader of Zimbabwe when it became independent on April 18, 1980. So he's in a different kind of like a class. But I frankly don't think that that is one aspect that we have to borrow as a country from Zimbabwe.
So we are running out of time. Tomorrow, what are you talking about on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting program in the sense that it is going to involve you and I. It's probably going to be an extended version of Shaka Extra Time, because it will be looking at a recent trip that took us to 3 countries, DRC, Zambia and Tanzania, and we're looking at essentially what you would call democratic transitions in Africa. So we'll be sharing that kind of experience and probably telling our people that we discovered, unfortunately, that it looks like the democratic space looks increasingly shrinking.
Interesting. Before we go, what are your thoughts on what's really happening in Uganda? Should people just sit by and watch, or maybe it's about time people voice their opinions on how they feel about what's going on?
I think they should, of course, not only voice their opinions, but assert their constitutional rights, their inalienable rights, their birthrights, as a matter of fact, because, in fact, this is the time when the Ugandans have an opportunity to demonstrate whether, in fact, they are citizens, meaning they owe allegiance to the state, not to an individual, and which means they have actually constitutional rights, or whether they are subjects, meaning they owe allegiance to an individual authority who would be like an emperor, a dictator, a presidential monarch, and in which case they have no constitutional rights, but rather privileges which are granted to them in turn by that very individual authority. So it's up to Ugandans now to demonstrate that they are indeed citizens and they can clearly tell us what they want. Museveni knows exactly what he wants.
Interesting. Shaka, we look forward that maybe another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week. Thank you all for watching. And once again, Shaka.